with us. Can you hear me? There was some. Can I be heard?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So Sridala has been with us earlier also and enthralled us with her poetry. Her first collection of poems was A Reluctant Survivor. It was shortlisted for the Shakti Bhatt First Book Award in 2008. Her second collection, Escape Artist, shortlisted for the Khushwant Singh Poetry Prize. And her work has featured in the Blood Axe Book of Contemporary Indian Poets. She was the 2011 Charles Wallace Writer in Residence at the University of Stirling, Scotland, and was a fellow of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa in 2013. In 2020, she was on the jury of the Montreal International Poetry Prize. Sridala wears many hats. She's also a photographer. She has conducted workshops and she has curated a university radio show. She has written 4 books for children, which have been translated into Polish, French, and Korean. The book which she will be reading from today is her most recent collection of poetry, published by the Context Westland in December 2021. So it really is a very recent collection. And Sridala, we look forward to hearing from you. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Aruna, and thank you to the Poetry Society of Hyderabad.
Can I just interrupt, please? Can I request everyone to please mute themselves?
Thank you, Aruna. Thank you, Aruna. Thank you to the Poetry Society of Hyderabad, who are old friends and supporters of poetry for decades. Thank you to my friends, Keki, Uma, people I can see amongst the participants for being here this evening. I don't know how many of you know what the situation is with Context Westland. It is a publisher that was owned by Amazon, and Amazon on the 1st of February decided to shut the publishing house down completely. So their backlist is going off the market in 3 days' time, and their front list, among which my new book, Run for the Shadows, is, because it was published only 2 months ago, will be available only till the 31st of March. This is the shortest lived of my books. Usually, people take time to buy poetry or to engage with it or to find copies of the book and like it and want to own it. This book doesn't have that time. This book is only going to be available till the end of March. So I'm grateful to everyone who has been having readings to support the poets of Context and Westland. And I have done readings almost at intervals of 10 days, sometimes back-to-back readings in the course of this week and the last couple of weeks. And I don't tire of it, because I'm happy to find my readers and I'm happy to read from this wonderfully produced book to new audiences and to potential readers. I thought I'd do something a little different today, because when Professor Mehdi invited me to read for the to the Poetry Society, she suggested that I also read from my older work. I have 2 collections at 7-year intervals, the first of which was published by the Sahitya Academy under the aegis of Keki Daruwala, who's here today. So what I thought I'd do is, I thought I would give you a sense of what my poetry has been like from my first collection to now by pairing my poems. So I will read a poem from previous collections, and I will read a poem from the current collection immediately after, to kind of give you a sense of how my poetry has shifted or changed over the years. While I'm very grateful for every audience that I have and every reading that I have, the last couple of days, it's been a little awkward promoting these readings on social media, because there is a big war that has started elsewhere in the world. And we are once again We are always at a time of crisis, but we are once again at a time when it feels odd to talk about other things at a time when there are people whose lives and whose livings and whose countries are at stake. This made me remember, sometime around 2005 when Israel was bombing Qana. There was a hospital that had been bombed by them, and all that hospital had were children who were the victims of that particular bombing. And oddly enough, this was happening in the monsoon, and in Bombay, there was an art gallery that wanted to do a poetry reading celebrating rain. And it seemed like such a huge cognitive dissonance to me that elsewhere in the world this was happening, and people were talking about celebrating a season. It just seemed odd to me. So this poem is called Celebrating Rain, and it's from my first collection, A Reluctant Survival. Celebrating rain. We have gathered here today to curate the rain, celebrate its falling. We have gathered to hold the season like a cool veil over our scorching days. But think also for a moment of those who stand below the gathering clouds. History is nothing if not the telling of it. If nobody speaks of remarkable things, who will know about torn lands where the rains do not fall at this time, where the skies only hurl dark things, and where nothing quenches the thirst of bones? Who will know if we do not tell them that in the time when swings ought to be draped with flowers and trees brought to life by the touch of a foot, the only thing that blooms fiercely is the blood of those who did not ask for the battle to be brought into their homes while they lay asleep, moving imperceptibly from sleep to death, in the way that the clouds leach into the air and make it heavy with the weight of water, make it sharp with pain. Many things rain down upon us, but perhaps all things cannot be celebrated, even in season. This next poem that I'm reading is from my recent collection called Run for the Shadows. It's called Conquest of Paradise. After all, the apples continued to grow upon the trees as they did after every conquest. They ripened in the autumn sun, dreaming their own idols. It's a kind of paradise to go on as before, though the presiding gods come and go, to live as if the midnight knocks were a worm growing inside a fruit gone bad right from its tender time, as if stones weighed on the scales against bullets were the same as objects bouncing off bodies instead of invading them, and then once there, scattering like untimely hail upon a harvest, pocking the skin and keeping the more severe damage hidden inside. The land, but not the people, this ever-inventive path to suffering. A land without the people might be either the orchard without the gun leaning against the wall, or a child turning the barbed wire corner of some nightmare and never returning. Which people whose absence will let these rivers, these mountains, this very air crisp as some rich country's autumn, return to its reverie of harvest and plenty, of enough and more, of a varied richness from which no dreamer would want to wake? The stone or the bullet to chase away this kind of person or that? The two things are not equal and never have been, but conquerors have always known this, though sometimes they also know to hide this knowledge. Like a secret worm at the heart of the apple, they permit to grow upon the trees from which these people, the conquered, continue to pluck and keep a few, keep the enchantment alive. There are, amongst these kind of poems, there are also some poems that are very personal poems that I wrote for specific people, often my family. So across the distance of 14 years, this is a poem for my mother. This one from a reluctant survivor. It's called Almost 60. Use the early mornings to recall the gravel between the toes on those long ago barefoot walks to school. As the dew on the lawn you gave yourself as a gift now slides gratefully between the cracks in your heels. And when getting up from making an elaborate, beautiful column is not as easy as it has now become to let go, know that you have passed on much more than an impression of age, that some things are written not in the genes, but in the bones of those who are now growing up and will in turn leave behind a legacy of ageless trees. And 14 years later, this is another poem for my mother. It's called Spirit Animal. You recognize the moment when one part of you ribbons out to reside in the animal that came seeking something that you were willing to give. You gave more, and you've never been sure if that also was sought and you just didn't know at the time. But the giving has made you strong, you young and the creature strong. She sits curled on the wall or the sill, belly full, an assumed dignity that comes more easily with practice. She is goddess, she is Bastet, and sometimes she remembers it. She was the runt of the litter, but she was intrepid, and so she was named. Needed help, but accepted it as nothing more than her due. You watch, and maybe you learn how to accept without undue gratitude, how to be fearless, or at least how to fake it, and how to fold antic youth within the stature of your age. She teaches you detachment and a still and watchful patience, endless grace. But there's always something left to learn, how to sharpen your claws, land on your feet, and find new lives to live. When my first book was released, Professor Meenakshi Mukherjee was one of the people who introduced the book in Hyderabad at its release. And she made an observation about how so many of my poems are about or contain trees. And that is an observation that is very true, not just of my poetry, but about the way we live our lives, the way where we live. And you will see that not just in my poetry, but one of the things that I asked for when this book was being designed, one of the only things I said was, I want a tree on the cover. And the design department at Context obliged with a beautiful cover. So I'm going to read you two poems that have trees in them. This is from a reluctant survivor. It's called About a Tree. Just where the road curves around the corner stands a tree. Trees come bearing sand and cement, and the drivers just miss backing into it on their way in to the house that's coming up there. In spring, the tree squats in sand piles. The trunk rises dark and strong, and its branches bear lightly the slanting translucence of new leaves. The tree gives up its leaves to the air and the light, even as we toss at its roots our casual gifts of stone and brick. And scene scene. A forest is in thought. Branches are unresolved. Birds are leaves in motion. Inattention, careful, and then a forest is a stereogram. Birds in Dolby surround. Movement like the sky, invisible. In repetition, there is no pattern. A forest is clarity without the attention. Birds, branches, sky, intent. For a long time, I took inspiration from cinema and the visual arts in the writing of my poetry. In my most recent collection, I've tried hard to avoid doing that to the extent that I used to do, because I felt that a kind of a dependence on an image that someone already knows or is familiar with, it's a very easy way to say something in the poem that might be difficult to do without that visual aid. But all the same, my poetry is and continues to be, continues to draw from the visual and especially from painting and cinema. So I wanted to share with you a couple of these poems that have that, that sense of drawing from the visual and from poetry. This poem from Escape Artist, which was my second collection of poems, is called Perforation, and it draws from a painting by the surrealist painter Odilon Redon. Perforation. Have to meet its eye, this aperture that looks like a balloon or a head floating in the sky that promises to be the guardian of the water we keep in our blood. Fontanelle, a temporary rain. Wring out the confessions before they're put out to dry. This is all very sudden. I will not say blind. That would be to confess to crimes I did not commit. Words sing, that is what they say. They commit flight as they would a crime, a temporary insanity. Afterwards, it pours as if the sky was sieved or shot until it died. But what am I saying? I must not wax eloquent or I will have to answer for it. You know, the kind of abstraction that was in that poetry is something that I have been trying to move away from in this collection. So in a sense, this collection very much harks back to my first one. This is from Run for the Shadows. It's a poem called Against the Grain. Sleep comes like a blunt instrument in the days before. Rothko behind afternoon eyes. Colors pulse. The agitated horizontal. Parallaxed, a third kind of eye. It turns inward. Words run, chased by a pill-wielding sleep. Struck, I vibrate, horizontal and unquiet. I think anyone who has experienced migraines, as I tend to do, will kind of get what's happening in that poem, the kind of state of mind that that with the kind of visual auras that you get around the eye and the inability to sleep, in a sense. I'm reading at the Poetry Society of Hyderabad, and it would be very odd if I did not read my Hyderabad poem from my second collection. This is called The Twinning of Cities. Once it used to be more clear, this division marked off by two bridges flung over what used to be a river, but now looks like a drain. Once a lake divided cantonment from court, Even then, cities were marked by who lived where and what it said about them. Now, the twinning of cities is more than an accident of location. In one direction, it is a geography of memory. In the other, an avid, hungry spreading. The two are superimposed. Your city, for instance, the old one, flattened with the weight of 4 centuries. You say it now has boundaries within its own body. There are times when one would need the escort of those who, once they have seen you safe across the border, will turn and have a different face for those who see them from the other side, their side. You had a name for this, but I was not listening. I was thinking, where areas have borders, would I need a passport to come and see you? My city is the true walled city. You'd think of forts, wouldn't you? Old crumbling walls mellow in the setting sun, or illuminated in the evening on a day when the Nizam's jewels are laid out on velvet in a way they never were before. My city, the high-tech one, is a fort where the signs that say keep out are activated by the throw of a switch. Electric fences come alive at night, and the people claim for their houses the mongrels that scrounge for scraps outside the servants' quarters. Beware of dog. I'd like to show you around here and say something grand. Once there were monoliths with a large wave of the hand. But what used to look like the giants had played a game of marbles and left suddenly when perhaps their mothers called, now only looks like what it has become. Raw earth turned inside out. It is not the past, but we as children who were innocent. At the edge of this city, we reach the limits of our imagination. City limits, what a strange turn of phrase. The city has no end. Here, anxieties are global. High-rise buildings plant their giant feet into the ground and the ripples move ever outward. Every day, the earth shakes and the windows rattle. Our upheavals on this side of town are entirely secular. We are blasting the face of the Deccan Plateau, making it uniform. We are prepared to wait for the dust to settle. One city we preserve in sepia-tinted photographs, graves of nostalgia. But every once in a while, someone cuts down a tree in an ancient courtyard or removes a plaque from an old building. Someone protests the flinging of color in the air. People fade away from where they were born and reappear in faraway places. And the other city imagines it catches from across its shrinking lakes a whiff of formaldehyde from its dying twin. I'll change the pace a little bit. I'll read the following 2 or 3 poems are all from my new collection. This is a poem that I enjoy reading, actually. It's a kind of a love poem. It also draws from Carnatic music, which often plays in the background in my house. So this is called Romance with Carnatic vocal. Kanna, these gestures the rain makes, it makes for you. First as violin, then as kanjira. It was meant to be intensely, but the rain forgets it falls as lightning does. It was meant to be not like rainbows that never knew they were on view, or they might have dressed for the occasion. It was meant to be romantic, like the kurinji which comes rarely, comes suddenly and brings no edges when it does, and instigates nothing in its name. Kanna, what will the girl sing who sings to her friend about him as she waits? For when he walks down the street and the streetlights drop their orange flowers at his feet, Flowers she will later pick and thread into unfading solar-powered garlands of Kanakambaram. Will she sing in 5 notes, tremolos and gamakas falling jaltarangili? Will her love be like needles, Kanna, because you didn't come when you said you would, because you forget like the lightning? Or will her voice be like dancing, sweet clap of arched feet on smooth gray concrete, the smell of armpits and necks and smudge-streaked foreheads? Kanna, these gestures are theories. When you meet, forget rain, forget streets, feet, flowers. Listen, there's a tilana playing that you already know. Keep time the way she keeps it until you return. I'm suddenly changing my mind about a poem that I was going to read. I'm going to read one of the few poems that I actually wrote during the pandemic. This one and the next one are both one of the few poems that I wrote during the pandemic, because when something very overwhelming happens, I find that if you write in response to it immediately, it's often not the best poem that you could have written about that particular subject. But this one brings a lot of things together, the fact that we were watching so many different things happen at the same time, countries falling to coups, the pandemic, people traveling to their homelands. There were so many different things that were happening. And we all sought comfort in our K-dramas and in the things that were happening as escape in our online worlds. And I was trying to bring these two things together. It's called Dancing is a Headless Thing. All summer, I watched him dance, this liquid child. It is a season of urgent distraction, urgent attention. There is so much, too much, and none of it is happening to me. I am glad and guilty in equal measure. All spring, I watch him speak only with his eyes. Elsewhere, there was wailing unceasing, and the least we could do, the very least, was to listen, keep watch. The numbers grew, then thinned, then clustered into dangerous places. When the rains came, the statues fell. I understand dance differently now, the unselfing of it, the mind detached, the memory linking only in muscle and movement. It is winter when he learns detachment. So many ways to be headless. They danced a gathering. They called for the guillotines. There were no leaders. They became water. They were held and held. There were no dancers left. I'll end with a poem for my son. It's called Blessing. The year we became still and hid in plain sight like river stones ground gray, hoping nothing would touch us, good or evil. Dreams walked hand in hand with nightmares. And even you who arrowed your way back into this nest must have dreamt of flight, since it is also an unsettling. We hunkered down like roots in winter. We gathered together like distressed trees signaling for help. We gave succor to each other from the unseen places. There will be a later. There will be a later that holds hope the way the screeching kite is held aloft by all of the air. When the time comes, even fledglings move from effort into lightness. And you for whom I still dream of flight, when the time comes, though you are now tightly held, when the time comes, may you be slowly released. When the time comes, may you rise into hope. When the time comes, may you find the world in that vast kindness. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's come here today and listened.
Thank you, Sridala. I mean, that the time just flew. I didn't realize how fast it went, the beautiful imagery and the thoughts which go into it, that blasting the face of the Deccan, stone and brick at the root of the foot of the tree. And the last one to your son, I think that was, a lot of, emotional kind of poetry. Why did you name your book Run for the Shadows?
There are many reasons, but the simplest one is that I just took it off the lyrics from a Bowie song. It's a Bowie song called Fame. And this is one of the lines that comes in it. And it's a line that I actually use in a poem in this book. It's a line from a poem in this collection as well.
Can you read that poem, or if it's too just the verse?
Oh, you want me to? It's part of a really long poem. Let me see which part it is. It's a long poem. Are you sure you want me to read this part?
If up to you, if you don't mind reading.
No, I don't mind. If there's time, I can read it. So the poem is a poem in 4 parts called 3 False Starts and a Conclusion. And this is part 1. It's called 1, Lost is Love. 1, to have excised ambition is not the same as having never had any at all. I excised it. I never had any at all. I can't tell. My ambition now is to hide effectively, which is to say, I would like to do nothing superlatively well, to be known for it, to be renowned for doing nothing. Oh, am I confusing fame with ambition? That is not my intention. Once I threw myself into the new and abandoned it when it became old. I am a child in these matters. I would like to say I am different now. I am different. Now, fear drives me, though I act upon it by doing nothing. 2, not doing is not the same as doing nothing. 3, find purpose, the man said, and the means will follow. If I run for the shadows, if I hide, if that is my purpose, do the means follow like a docile calf its mother? Or does it give chase, futile from the start? Because what would it look like for means to follow purpose in this matter? 4, I am paraphrasing 2 poets when I say I am doing nothing, and that is poetry. Listen.
Thank you, Shilpa. That was really lovely.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's a problem with my signal or yours, but here and there it was.
Oh, was it lagging?
Okay. No, just a little. And what is your fascination with trees? Why? What you
My mother
mentioned
is
on-
an avid gardener. We have always lived among them. We have planted them without thought to whether we are going to leave that place behind or what will happen to it when we are not there. So all my life long, I've watched my mother plant trees and move away to other places, leaving the trees behind. But they exist and they give shade to other people who need them. And they are a whole ecosystem in themselves, above and below ground. And they're worth thinking about a lot.
You have a lovely way of reading also. Your voice is so musical and lilting.
Thank you, Aruna. Does anyone have questions? How does this work?
Yeah, anybody wants to ask any questions? I think, Nikhil, you can see if a hand goes up.
Thank you to everyone who said things in the comments. Thank you very much.
Nikhil, is anyone wanting to ask a question?
Kiki, what about you? Do you have a comment or a question or anything? Uma? You'd have to unmute though.
No questions, sorry. But anyway.
I have a question.
Uma said she wants to
I
ask.
have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Isma.
Yeah. In your poem from the collection Run for the Shadows, perimenopausal,
Yes.
I want to know why you have cut the lines like that. It's very interesting how you have
Let me look.
divided the lines.
I think poems are visual as much as they are things that you hear and absorb. And sometimes, the things that you say as a prose line, things that might be divided by a comma or things that might be divided by other punctuation. When you say it in a poem, to break it up in a particular way makes it both visually interesting and kind of spotlights those particular phrases or words that you want. So you can't you might miss a word like food in a long line. You might miss a word like this egg, or anything, a random line or just a word or a phrase gets lost in a longer line. But when it's broken up into small lines and indented, then you can't help but look at it and wonder what significance that word has in the poem. So that is why I worked with the lines the way I did in that poem.
But you did it only in one poem.
No, there are many poems in which there are lines that are, if you look at Cinema Pathe, for instance, there are, if you look at Vertical Smile, that is a completely, if you look at Dialogue, those are all poems in which lines are used or broken up or arranged differently.
Okay, very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Uma, you had a question, please ask.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, Sridala, lovely. Thank you. I really always love listening to you read, even otherwise when we've read together, and particularly this, your own poetry. I've been reading about the poetry of witness, and I was wondering if you had, I'm sure you have thought about it, but what is your own personal, way of thinking about it? Whether it's your poem about the Twin Cities or the pandemic or so much else. When you engage with something that is, whether it's a crisis or a trauma or romance or a pleasure or a blessing, what does it do when you put it down? What does that, what happens? What does witnessing do? Is it the witness? Is it, can you, I know I'm not the most articulate about this because I'm trying to figure it out myself.
No, thank you. I mean, that's an interesting question, and it's something that I have thought about, because the conclusion that I have come to over the years is, so for instance, the poem that I opened this reading with, Celebrating Rain, is something that I wrote, in an instant of reaction to the events that were happening in Lebanon, as well as the dissonance that I was experiencing with an art gallery asking for poets to read their work at that time. So it was an immediately reactive poem in that sense. But that is something that that is something that I've rethought over the years, because the questions that I ask myself, and I don't have answers to them exactly, I can only decide to do or not to do something personally. The question that I ask myself is, who is the person to whom these events are happening, or that one is reacting to in the piece of writing, in the text? Is it my story to tell? Is it okay for me to put myself in the role of the person experiencing that event? I think it would be egregious for me to put myself in the role of a domestic worker or a factory worker going back to their hometown in the middle of the pandemic, not having found rations or a place to stay. That would it would make me cringe to write a poem from that perspective. But I am a witness to what is happening. I am a witness to the fact that this happened, this happened to large numbers of people at a time in our country. And it would be equally odd of me to write about something that was occupying my everyday, pretending that this wasn't happening outside the walls of my house. So I think it's important to locate the witness, and it is important to write sensitively without assuming a voice that is not one's own, or to speak on behalf of other people. You can speak on behalf of yourself, and sometimes you probably oughtn't to speak, even though you have things to say. But
Yes.
that is something that is up to each person to decide when they're writing, I think. If we didn't have witnesses, we wouldn't know about a lot of things that are happening in the world. But, like William, was it William Carlos Williams who said, nobody gets the news from poetry, but we would die without it.
Lovely.
Keki would know. I think it's William Carlos Williams. And I'm not quoting exactly.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an interesting question. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, any more? If there's nobody, Jayanti, can I?
Yes. Yeah. Do I do the vote of thanks? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
So it was a lovely evening, Sridala. I think I've seen you before with Aparajita, moving images. You and Uma Mogal, I could recognize straight away.
Yes.
So it was fun. And you really have covered a lot of subjects. No? I mean, cross sections, not stuck to anything. Very nice. It was a very wonderful evening. So thanks to you. You're the chief guest in this place. And I really, on behalf of the Poetry Society, am thanking you for finding time in your busy schedule to talk to us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And if I may urge you to, if you have already bought copies for yourself, that's fantastic. But if I could request that you buy and donate a copy to a library of your choice. Many people can read one single book. Many people will have access to a book once it is no longer available on the market. After all, what we want as poets is for as many people to read our work as possible. The physical existence of this book matters less than the fact that people should read this book. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for inviting me to this really amazing organization that has kept itself running over the decades through everything that has happened in Hyderabad. Thank you.
Thank you, Sridala. And we also like to thank all the guests who've also come today. And we hope that you will continue to keep attending. And you too, Sridala, most welcome to join our meetings once a month. And we are really grateful to Nikhil, who organizes the Zoom meetings for us every month. So it's lovely. And your books, are they all available on Amazon or only this one?
Escape Artist and Run for the Shadows are both available on Amazon, yes.
Okay. And Only this one up to the 31st, is it?
Yes, after that, it's unlikely to be available. It will, they will recall copies if they aren't already sold out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was earlier in the National Police Academy, so I'll donate one book to the NPA because a lot of the probationers are fond of poetry.
Thank you.
Gives them a lot of relief, so I'll do that.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So thank you, everybody, and thank you again, Sridala. So Nikhil, can we wind up? Nikhil?